Welcome, welcome, welcome back, my Be Health Empowered family, to another episode of Excuse Me, Doctor, with Dr. Mel. I am so delighted to welcome you back and really wish for you an incredible year. Since we are at the start of a new year, it's a new year, a new you, but it's the same really focus that we have on bringing you the best information, the best evidence-based information for you to make wise health decisions about your health of your family, and even the health of your community. So thanks so much for tuning in to Excuse Me, Doctor on whatever platform you're watching us on. And if you happen to be on Facebook, please go ahead and hit that like button. And if you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that red subscribe button. We really appreciate you. We're welcoming our newbies, our first timers. Join our Be Health Empowered family. And we're looking forward to making sure that you also join the conversation by putting your comments and questions in the chat. We are here for it. And in order to really bring you the amazing show that we do every week, I have to welcome my incredible co-host with me here to the studio, and that is Miss Lila Mays and Mr. Wayne Bruce. Where are y'all? Hey.
Hey, Happy New Year.
As they
Happy
say
New
on the
Year.
West Coast, right here.
Right here. Happy New Year.
Here. Happy New Year. Where's that from, Lila? Where's that? The ear.
I don't know. I don't know how to break that down.
Well, more importantly, did y'all make any resolutions? None whatsoever.
I haven't made a resolution. I'm working on wellness, but I haven't really made a resolution.
Right.
Yeah,
I think everybody is wellness is on their list somewhere.
I've made a resolution to just be healthier.
There we go. There we go.
We can take it.
All right. Well, I think we have probably great company out there. You know what? Put y'all New Year's resolutions in the chat, especially if they include wellness. We would love to see them. And so what are we talking about on the show today?
Hey, look, when you was growing up, we talk about that uncle that always had cigarette in the mouth, talk like this. Hey boy, come on, come. And it would never fall out. Unlike that. And they would be smoking one of the brands,
Cools, right? The menthols,
mentholated,
right?
Menthol, and the women would. I can remember my mother smoking Virginia Slims because they were
right. Well, it's funny. I got to share with y'all my warm-up routine before I come on the show. It does include watching Family Feud, and yes, I know Cat Williams slammed Steve Harvey, but I still watch Family Feud. And basically, one of the questions was, name something with menthol in it. And Vicks Vapor Rub was not the top answer. It was actually cigarettes.
Wow.
Ironically, given that we're talking about this tonight.
I forgot Vicks had mentholated. What was the other mentholated product you put on? Bengay was mentholated.
Bengay, yeah, absolutely. But I remember my first job working at People's Drug Store when I was 16. I was a cashier in Portsmouth, Virginia. And I would say a good 1 out of 3 customers bought cigarettes. And every time I would hand it to them, if I picked the wrong one out, they'd say, "No, baby, I mean the one with the menthols in it."
Wow.
No. That one right over there. That one right over there.
Right. Exactly. And it turns out that menthol cigarettes were being marketed directly to Black people.
For sure. Yeah.
I mean, every ad growing up in the 70s was a cool brother with a lady on the arm, and he was either about to light her cigarette or he
Yep.
was opening a pack of cigarettes.
Right.
I mean, they
Well,
made it look super smooth. They made it look real cool. They
I
did.
they
mean,
did.
if you didn't have some Afro sheen in a cigarette, something was wrong.
Your black card got revoked. But now the FDA wants to ban menthol in cigarettes. So we're going to be talking tonight with an expert panel on, are there pros and cons to this? Are black people being targeted because, the most of the people that smoke menthol cigarettes are black people? Or is it something that really is going to save lives? So stay right here because we are going to get into it. We have two incredible experts who are going to dive deep on this topic with us.
I'm
Yes,
excited. I'm excited.
it'll be good. And maybe someone's resolution is to quit smoking. So,
I
Right,
hope so.
exactly. And this show is for you. So share, share, share with anybody who you know who needs to hear this topic and needs information about quitting smoking because we're going to get into that too. And we have our what? What's next? Our weekly recap. Right?
recap.
Here we go. Here we go. Weekly recap.
All right. So let's jump right in, Dr. Mel, to staying awake to diabetes. This one is a
Yeah.
this is a good one.
Well, so the reason it's titled like that because it's really about sleep issues. There was a
Right.
study done that showed women with sleep issues, no matter their weight, had a greater risk of developing prediabetes.
Wow. I mean, this resonates with me because of my age and hormones and all of that. So I
Mhm.
know women with who are perimenopausal, who are actually going through menopause, have some real sleep challenges, and I am one of them. Getting a full 7 hours sleep is almost impossible for me. Um, so what do we need to sort of concern ourselves around that, Dr. Mill?
Well, you're not alone, Lila. I mean, that is a common issue, and it was actually highlighted in the study that those women in perimenopause are even higher risk
Mhm.
because of not getting that 7 to 8 hours sleep. Both the quantity and the quality of sleep are critical
Okay.
for controlling blood sugar.
Mhm.
And even though the American Diabetes Association, they recommend screening for sleep issues when you're, treating people with prediabetes, it often is sort of the last thing on the list, or they don't even get to it in in
Mhm.
in the discussions in counseling patients. So it's often overlooked. So I say, this show is really about empowering you to get the best possible health care. If you have sleep issues, bring it up to your doctor and or therapist to get proper counseling, proper testing, and high quality care.
So diabetes is one of the sort of issues, but what other things, what other problems can a lack of sleep lead to?
A lot. High blood pressure,
Mhm.
even dementia. And
Mm.
so again, it's not something to be ignored or self-medicated, taking Benadryl or other
Mm.
over-the-counter things without really dealing with the root cause. So bring it up with your doctor for sure.
Okay, cool. All right, moving into our second recap of the week, anxiety. How much is too much? I think this is a great recap to get into, Dr. Mel. How much is too
Yeah.
much?
So, it's normal to feel anxious from time to time because it actually might even improve your performance in certain ways. It can be
Mhm.
an internal alarm clock to also help us recognize danger and even encourage us to be more conscientious. But sometimes it can spill over into what we call generalized anxiety disorder, where
Okay.
anxiety, instead of being a sort of internal warning sign, really becomes crippling and stops us from really functioning at our best.
Okay, so how much anxiety is too much, and how do we know what it looks like? I had a car accident a couple of years ago, and one of my forms of anxiety shows up when I'm driving, but I'm at the point now, Dr. Mel, that I do feel like it's more than it should be. It's really almost crippling. Yeah.
Sure.
So how much
Well,
is too much?
if you start to notice that worry and fear are there constantly,
Yeah.
or if it's keeping you from doing what you need to do to function on a regular basis, then
Okay.
that's a symptom or a signal that you might, that it has gone too far and that you might actually need some help.
Mhm.
Um, Also, too, sometimes anxiety can manifest itself physically with restlessness, increased
Mhm.
heart rate, sweating, trouble concentrating. So, if you start to notice that worry and fear are there constantly, or any of these physical signs, again, bring it up to your doctor, um, and or your therapist to start thinking about and focusing on ways to address it. And some of those can really be just what you can do for yourself in addition to engaging with a healthcare professional is distract yourself, listening to music, paying close attention to the lyrics, doing word games, calling a friend, or you can just let it go, just allow yourself to experience it, but set yourself a 10 to 30 minute time limit, like where you just let it all go, but then and allow yourself to sort of think through the things that are on your mind, but at 30 minutes you stop and you focus on something else. Those are two common techniques that you can start to try for yourself um, before you go or in addition to seeking professional help.
So, Dr.
Okay, so
Mel,
for me, I'm sorry, wait, but I was just gonna say for me, mine is when I'm driving. So one of the things that does help is listening to some good
Music.
books while I'm in the car. Not
Yeah,
even music, like a good
good
audio
books.
book.
Yes,
good book.
absolutely.
Yeah, I recently read that eating a sour, like a sour sweet tart, can help you can help in anxiety, and while you're going through a panic or anxiety attack,
Because it gives
because
you
it
something
takes
else to focus on.
it takes your
Right.
mind off
Yeah,
of
yeah.
the tartness.
Good stuff.
Well, Dr. Mel, I recently I was involved in a grant where we went and taught young people uh, about dealing with the internet, how to handle the internet, and
And health
what
misinformation.
health misinformation and all. And one of the key things that they wanted to work on was their mental health. And we're talking about 13-year-olds, 13
Wow.
to 18-year-olds. Their number one focus was their mental health. So that's an age bracket where they're starting to get into a lot of things,
Hmm.
possibly weed,
Yeah.
smoking.
Well, that's what this next thing is about, the 411 on weed and youth mental health. And
Mhm.
really, you know, cannabis has been branded as a way to take care of anxiety and other mental health issues.
Mhm.
And about 6% of teens, or 1.5 million kids, actually smoke cannabis, or also known as weed. But there was a new study recently out of the UK that showed that among 6,500 adolescents aged 13 to 14, um, that use of cannabis as well as CBD or other synthetic cannabinoids that you find in vaping pens are linked to depression, anxiety disorder, or conduct disorder, as well as auditory hallucinations. And there was
Wow.
association with each of these, but the risk appeared greatest with the synthetic cannabinoids, the ones that you find in vape pens. And so I think it's just really important to uncouple the branding of cannabis as something that helps you, especially to young people, because it actually has this potential association with making mental health issues worse.
Yeah,
Okay.
it acts as a multiplier of mental health issues. I think probably we need to increase the education in that group, and just
Right.
how do we do that? That should be a focus on how can we get to them. That
I say influencers. That's my answer to everything now.
influences the
That's a
TikTok
show.
influences
It
influence
is.
everything else.
It is.
Right.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you all. We are going to be bringing you the what y'all think this week, right? But it's going to
At
be
a
Yes.
at the
new
end of
time.
the show.
At a new
Yes.
time.
At a
Yeah.
new time. Yes.
So we are going to move into our next segment. Thank you so much, Lila and Wayne. We're going to see you back in a little bit. But right now, we're going to go into that topic that we talked about before, which is we know that cigarette smoking is bad for your health, But cigarettes with menthol are a particular issue. They're used way more by African Americans and might have a role in worse health outcomes, cancers, and even death for those individuals who smoke who are African American. The Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA, last fall proposed a federal ban on menthol cigarettes. And it's right now in front of President Biden, even as we speak. So this sounds good, right? But there are actually critics who thinks that this might lead to further criminalization of the Black community by making menthol cigarettes essentially illegal and potentially creating a Black market in which people will get arrested more. So, what's the deal? We have two amazing panelists with us tonight. First of all, Dr. Leslie Kingslow. He's a partner in Pulmonary Critical Care Associates and is a nationally and internationally recognized pulmonologist and critical care physician. He's based in the Washington, D.C. area, though, and has over 35 years of experience caring for patients with lung diseases. Welcome, Dr. Kingslow. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, Dr. Clark. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And then we also have Dr. Reed Tuckson. He is a co-founder of the Black Coalition Against COVID and also the Coalition for Trust in Health and Science. Among numerous national leadership positions, he served as Commissioner of Public Health for the District of Columbia, and he is a member of the prestigious National Academy of Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Tuckson. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be here and appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you both. I am going to jump right in here, starting with Dr. Tuckson. We talked about menthol, but what is it really? And what does adding menthol to cigarettes do?
Well, thanks a lot. What we know is that for many people, not only is it that cigarettes will kill you, but they also taste terrible. And so menthol is a substance, a kind of a chemical that can change the way the brain registers the sensations of taste and pain. It's sort of a cooling sensation in the throat and the airways, and that makes the smoke feel less harsh and makes it easier to inhale. And so bottom line, because menthol masks the harsh taste of tobacco, it's a lot easier for kids to start smoking, more addictive for anybody that does it, and makes it very hard to quit.
So you mentioned kids. Who uses menthol cigarettes the most and why?
Well, again, it has become very much a part of Black culture. We are the ones that use it the most. In 1963, menthol cigarettes made up about maybe 15% of all the cigarettes sold in the United States. In 2021, menthol flavored cigarettes made up about 37% of all cigarettes, which is the highest that we've ever seen it. 85% of Black smokers use menthols compared to 30% of white smokers. And so that really gives you a sense. 85% of Black smokers today use menthols. In the 1950s, fewer than 10%. So what this is really all about is that the tobacco industry has done a very good job, unfortunately, of marketing these menthol flavored cigarettes to Black folks. And unfortunately, their marketing efforts have worked very well. The result of this, of course, is death. This marketing effort that they do, and those African Americans who are being paid off by the tobacco industry are responsible ultimately for 45,000 unnecessary deaths a year. And that's really, really, really making me, very upset. Just to give you the final word on the magnitude of this problem, Dr. Mel, between 1980 and 2018, we lost 160,000 African Americans who died prematurely just behind this one issue.
Wow. And I have to say, my father-in-law, was the anniversary of his passing last year. He was one of them. And so, yeah, this is very personal to me, and I understand your passion about it because I share your passion. I think you also mentioned young people. From what I understand, menthol, again, because it makes things more pleasant, is also disproportionately marketed to young people. And about 1 in 3 young people use menthol cigarettes preferentially. So, as you can imagine, if you create smokers by making it more pleasant by using menthol, both in vaping and regular cigarettes, that's going to be a problem as well. Um, so, Dr. Kingslow, want to definitely bring you in on this discussion. What are the effects of cigarette smoking on your body? Why is it so deadly?
Well, as you're probably well aware, there's about 7,000 different chemicals that are placed in the cigarette. And these chemicals are heavy metals, hydrocarbons, aromatic amines, formaldehyde, cadmium, benzium. These are all carcinogenic and inflammatory causing agents. So when we take in tobacco, it causes a number of effects. One, it induces inflammation throughout the body. That inflammation puts a burden on organ systems, puts a burden on our immune system. We see a compromise in our ability to fend off germs and infections because of it. It also increases the formation of oxidized chemicals in the body. It denatures the DNA. It causes denaturization of proteins and lipids.
What
And
what do you
also
mean by
reduces
what do you mean by
it,
denaturation? Can you
it
break that down
destroys
for me?
the cells. It destroys
Hmm.
the cellular makeup of these chemicals in our body and these cells in our body. It also reduces our protective effects, the antioxidants that we use in our body to protect us against disease and illness. Those are sorely and exponentially reduced as well, such that with their reduction, our immunity goes down. We have an increased propensity for our inability to downregulate the ill effects at the cellular level, and we have an upregulation of those ill effects. So if we go from the head to toe and think about these organ systems and how they're affected, we recognize that tobacco abuse influences the formation of hardening of the arteries or arteriosclerotic disease. So there's an increased propensity for stroke, increased
Hmm.
propensity for vascular dementia. If we go down to the eyes, we recognize that there's an increased propensity for macular degeneration and blindness. If we go to the mouth, we recognize there's an increased propensity for periodontal disease, for oral cancers. In the chest, bronchitis, asthma, emphysema, pneumonias, and obviously cancer. The
Hmm.
heart, there's an increased propensity for coronary artery disease and congestive heart failure.
And
Vascular
heart
involving the
attacks are
legs,
what result from coronary artery disease, right?
surely.
Hmm.
So we have blockages of the coronaries, we get myocardial infarction. Any vessel that's injured from the brain to the toes gets compromised because of the chemicals in cigarettes. Bone disease, bone loss, increased worsening of rheumatoid arthritis,
Wow.
fertility issues, stillbirths, early deliveries, premature lung development in newborns. The list is exhaustive.
Wow.
From a from a from a social standpoint, um, loss of work days, obviously, absenteeism from work,
Because you're sick
and
all the time.
right, you're sick,
Yeah.
loss of income, an increased burden on the healthcare system where you're using more healthcare resources because of tobacco abuse, and then an earlier death. Hence the financial burden. If you're buying a pack a day, a pack is costing you whatever $12 a pack,
Mhm.
and you do the math. That's $4,000 a year that you're taking out of the pockets of your family, of your retirement, and that plays out. You're smoking 30 years. That's a life savings for many.
Right.
So it's a burden not only on the physical health, the mental health, the emotional health, but also the family health.
Right. That is an excellent summary. The one thing you didn't get in there was the bad breath, but you got everything else.
Try to touch on that with periodontal disease. Yes.
Right. Definitely. And I assume you see all these as a pulmonologist, a lung specialist, you probably see all these in your practice, right?
This is the bread and butter. This is how I make my living. And it's tragic that I have to make my living off of the disease induced by a commonly used and advertised and promoted product. But yes, patients come to my office with smoking history, with asthma. They present with emphysema. They present with lung nodules or advanced cancers. The interesting thing
Mhm.
about lung cancer is that it's a silent disease. You get a small lung nodule, it's not going to give you any symptoms. You're not going to notice anything until it's burdensome. It's grown to impinge upon vital organs within the chest or impinge upon the ribs and the nerves about the chest wall. The lungs have no pain fibers in it. So that's why lung cancer is so
Wow.
deadly, and we don't recognize it
Sure.
until people are much more
Sure.
advanced in their.
So let's throw the menthol back in here. Does menthol make the effects of smoking worse?
So
And if so, how?
So looking at the literature, we recognize that menthol does a few things. One, there are receptors in the brain that are considered reward receptors, where when they are stimulated, the brain feels the person feels as if they've been rewarded, and we know that menthol upregulates those receptors. It makes those receptors more attracted, more willing to bind to the menthol when we receive it, and it makes the body crave more menthol. We also
Mm.
recognize that menthol stimulates a memory center, some of the memory centers in the brain, and those memory centers have been recognized to be connected with nicotine addiction and make with the withdrawal from nicotine much worse. So the menthol makes the patient crave the nicotine more. Furthermore, we recognize that menthol in and of itself stimulates the development of more receptors for nicotine. So we see you've got these nicotine receptors in the body already. You smoke cigarettes with nicotine in it. There is these receptors then get sort of down regulated. We grow more receptors that crave more nicotine, and the
Mm.
menthol makes those receptors desire nicotine even further. So it makes the
Wow.
addiction even worse.
Wow. And I would imagine too, since menthol is also sort of like a painkiller, um, you can take deeper drags on your cigarettes and take in more smoke too, right?
Well,
Um,
just as Dr. Tuckson relayed, that cooling sensation um, makes it easier to smoke. You don't have the same side effects that the
Mhm.
non-mentholated cigarettes would induce: nausea, coughing, throat irritation, and it does have an analgesic effect and an anti-irritant effect. Yes.
Right. So Dr. Tuckson, you gave us the stats. I mean, just the numbers of individuals with premature deaths. 81% of Black people who smoke menthol cigarettes. What did the cigarette companies do? How did they promote it so effectively? What were the mechanisms that they've been using all along to do that?
Well, again, first of all, they had the unfortunate advantage that the product tastes good and people enjoyed using it, and then it's addictive. And so once you get them hooked, it's easy for them to keep you hooked. However, they were geniuses at marketing. They infiltrated themselves. I think of it as metastasized themselves like a cancer
Mhm.
into community-based organizations and Black publications. I remember vividly in the 80s, in the early 90s. I used to watch carefully the amount of cigarette advertising in Essence magazine. And I counted it very carefully, every edition, to see how much and what the trend was. And I noticed over time it started to go down, that there were less marketing of tobacco in Essence magazine, not a whole lot less, but it was still coming down. And I happened to be at an event with the publisher of the magazine, and I congratulated him on having, starting to turn their policy around. As soon as I told him that, he got right up and got on the phone and cussed somebody out back at his office and said,
Wow.
"What the hell is going on here? Why don't we have more ads from the tobacco industry? Because they pay well." So they
Mhm.
did a really good job, unfortunately, of adopting community organization. And then, unfortunately, what they've also done is they've put money in the pockets of many of our Black leaders. And so
Mhm.
that has made it, again, more difficult for us to keep them under control, because there are other members of the community who are either being supportive of the tobacco industry or strangely quiet.
Right, right. Influencers, as I mentioned before. And I also heard too, in addition to what you mentioned, that stores in Black neighborhoods had more in-store marketing and price promotions on menthol cigarettes. There were the billboards in Black communities, and then there were just cheaper prices in Black and low income neighborhoods for menthol cigarettes too. So like using pricing to make it more attractive too. Um, are we more likely to die from smoking related diseases than whites? Uh,
You
and is
know,
that linked to menthol?
I think, well, certainly it is linked to menthol in that it is linked to smoking tobacco. And as we know, the number one risk factor for death and disease is tobacco smoking. And so that really tells us. And so if we're smoking so much, and so regularly and so frequently, and given all the things that Brother Doctor just went through, I mean, in terms of the entire body's systemic response to
Mhm.
this, then of course, well, you take a population of people that are already struggling with social issues, with food and having good food and access to nutritious food on a regular basis, safe housing, all the things that are part of our society, with the prevalence of violence and leading to the tension and the anxiety, and again, pushing people to smoke and to do things that they shouldn't do, things against our own best self-interest because of how we deal with stress and tension. Putting all of that together, the
Mhm.
one thing you don't need, it's like having a ready-made fire and then you put gasoline on top of it. And that
Right.
tobacco is the gasoline on top of an already ready to go fire. And that's
Mhm.
why I think it's just particularly, difficult for us. And so we really, but the good news, I think, Dr. Mel, is that when we fight tobacco, we're also putting into play fighting for other health enhancing conditions, because it all starts to come together. If we can get you to care enough about whether you live or die, if we can get you to
Mhm.
care enough about not having secondhand smoke killing the people in your house, if you can care
Right.
enough about your body, your well-being, then I think it is much easier to start talking about diabetes, it's talking about hypertension, and we can start talking about
Mhm.
other things. So these things are so intimately intertwined that
Yeah.
one affects the other, and hopefully one will help cure the other.
Right. I mean, that's just a great explanation of how all the things that we always talk about are interrelated. And I want to bring it back though, because at the beginning I talked about that this is controversial. One would not think, based on everything that we've talked about, that this would be controversial at all, right? But the cigarette companies, of course, um, the ACLU, and some leaders in the Black community have come out against this ban or proposed ban on menthol cigarettes. So, what's the controversy? And I'll go to you first, Dr. Tuckson.
So what the thought is that the fear, and it's unfortunate, it is not the truth, but the fear is that the enforcement of this ban will lead to more interactions between the police department and Black youth in particular. So that having this ban in place, that there is a sense that the administration of it, the regulation of it, will cause policemen to be in more touch with Black kids. It turns out that that's not true. That this is not about any influence or any going after individual consumers. That is not. It cannot be enforced under this ban. The only people that are subject to the issues here are the manufacturers, the distributors, the wholesalers, the importers, and the retailers who manufacture, distribute, or sell these in the United States, not on people. And in fact, the regulations do not have any prohibition on individual consumer use or possession. So I'll just conclude my thought with this. And this is the logic that makes no sense. Logic is, okay, we're mad legitimately because the police too often harm and kill our kids. We're mad
Right.
because the tobacco industry focuses on killing our kids. Because we fear the police, let's let the tobacco industry keep killing our kids.
Right.
It's absolutely nonsensical. It makes
I know.
no sense. And the only reason why anybody can be running around talking about that is because there's some other conflict of interest in this game. Again, the police already do bad things to us. The tobacco industry we know does bad things to us because we're worried about more. And just think about what the scale is here. But the more engagement with police, let's look the other way and let the tobacco people keep killing our kids.
So, I hear everything you're saying. I'm 100% on board with you. However, I think one thing that may have contributed to the fear is the whole Eric Garner case in New York. He was actually assaulted by the police because he was selling loose cigarettes. And I think people have that association. There's also this concept too that this is an election year, and I mentioned that this proposed ban is on the desk of President Biden as we speak. And there's this question of, is it going to anger and alienate Black smokers in an election year? So how would you, either of you, how would you respond to that? How would you say, what would you say to those people that raise the specter and the horrible case of Eric Garner and his death, and then also to political concerns?
I would offer, well, there's no excuse for the over policing of Black men in our community. Eric Garner being at the top of the list, obviously, but the contention that focusing on the potential that an individual may be drug into the police industrial complex because they're selling loosies as an excuse for moving the discussion away from a universal ban, I think is unfounded and excessive. We make up 12% of the population, but we are the ones that are exponentially and disproportionately dying from the effects of tobacco abuse, lung cancer, heart disease, and the like. I think that removing menthol from the marketplace will make a substantial difference in our survival.
No, I think you're right on target. And now that you talk about removing menthol from the marketplace, I also wanted to go to you, Dr. Kingslow, about how does quitting smoking in general improve health outcomes? And well, let's just start there. How does quitting smoking in general, and obviously removing menthol from cigarettes makes them less addictive and less appealing. So how does that ultimately improve our health individually?
So there's some immediate effects from tobacco cessation, and there's long-term effects from tobacco cessation. Immediately, there's a sense of well-being once we quit. Within the first 1 month to 12 months, those of us who have a chronic cough from tobacco abuse, that cough abates. Within the first 2 years, our risk for heart disease, congestive heart failure induced by tobacco abuse wanes exponentially. Over the next 3 to 6 years, we recognize the incidence for coronary artery disease reduces by 50%. The risk for head and neck carcinoma reduces by 50%. At the 10 to 15 year interval, our risk for lung cancer returns back to the rest of the population. At 15 to 20 years, our risk for having a heart attack, our risk for having a stroke goes back to the levels of the general population. And at that same time frame, the risk for head and neck cancer zeroes out, the risk for pancreatic cancer zeroes out, and our risk for cervical carcinoma reduces exponentially as well.
Wow. It's just astounding, the ability for the body to repair itself when you don't constantly put poison in it. And when you, it's amazing.
The sad effects as it pertains to the lungs is that unlike many of the other organs, the lung isn't quite as resilient. Once we take in a certain amount of tobacco as it pertains to the development of asthma and emphysema, we recognize that although we could slow down the effects of tobacco on and the untoward effects of tobacco on those diseases, lung function loss is sustained and continued throughout the person's life after they've stopped smoking. The rate of decline of lung function slows down, but they still lose lung function all of us do, but the loss of lung function is more exponential in those who smoked, even though they might have quit.
So given the vulnerability of the lung, and since lung cancer is one of the more common cancers resulting from smoking, what should smokers and former smokers do on a yearly basis to screen and see if they have lung cancer?
Well, that's an excellent question. First off, we should never smoke. We shouldn't smoke cigarettes, cigars. We shouldn't vape. We shouldn't smoke pot. We shouldn't smoke anything. The particles, the microparticles that we're inhaling are toxins to the lung. I ask my patients, if you walked into a room and you saw dust particles floating in the room, you wouldn't walk in that room and inhale that. Well, if you're smoking a cigarette, you're inhaling those particles. They're just so small that you can't see them. We can't even see them under a normal phase microscope. They're so tiny, but they're toxic to the lung. They get lodged into the lung. They cause injury and destruction. And the chemicals that are in those particles are malignant potentiators. Back to the point at hand, the important thing is that patients need to see their doctor on a regular basis, inform their doctor that they are a smoker. According to the United States Preventive Service Survey that was updated just a couple of years ago, the criteria for screening for lung cancer is this: if you are between the ages of 50 and 80 and you've smoked at minimum 1 pack per day for 20 years or the equivalent of such, then you qualify to be screened for lung cancer. And the way in which we screen for lung cancer is by an annual low-dose CAT scan of the chest that looks from the upper neck down to the kidneys to look to see if you have any evidence of tumor or nodules. A nodule may not be malignant, but if we see it, then depending on its appearance, its size, its shape, its density, its location, and your age, it'll prompt a concern as to whether it should be addressed immediately or it needs to be followed on a serial basis. If we see a nodule, depending on the size, we'll get a CAT scan within a few months, and we'll do it serially for that first year. If the nodule doesn't change over a 2-year time frame, then it's considered benign. If it's larger than a centimeter, then we typically want to be aggressive with that, with considerations for doing a special type of scan called a PET scan and considerations for doing a biopsy. Lung cancer management in 2024 is not the same lung cancer management of 1990 or 1995 or even 2010. There are modalities that are available now that make the management of this disease much more treatable. And although cure rates have not moved have not increased to any substantial degree, we're able to diagnose disease much earlier. We're able to remove disease much more readily and intercede with non-invasive measures if need be, if the patients are not surgical candidates.
Wow, thank you. Thanks for running that down. And I think one of the most important takeaways is, screen, just like, mammograms are recommended, colonoscopies are recommended. If you're 50 to 80 and you have a smoking history, you should be getting screened every year, and not to be afraid of the diagnosis because there are ways to manage it.
Now, the most important thing was to not stop. Don't ever start.
And of course, right.
I did fail to mention that if you smoked and you smoked 20 pack years or more, you need a CAT scan annually for 15 years after the last cigarette puff. For one CAT scan per year for 15 years.
Right. So I am going to bring Lila and Wayne back in to see if we have any questions from the audience. This has really been a great discussion. I still have some other questions left.
And I think I'm going to make a decision. I a few questions, but that was such an incredible discussion between you three. I just want to be transparent that I did lose my father 1 year ago this week to lung cancer, and so hearing you talk about all the marketing, Dr. Tuckson, that's the marketing we grew up with in the 70s and in the 80s. To hear you talk about the things that should happen, Dr. Kingslow, about getting the screenings and walking into a room and inhaling, they're trigger points for me. I just want to say, and losing, the one thing we don't talk about is how families deal with the person who in their family comes down with lung cancer, and how incredibly difficult it is to watch your loved one fight through that. And I say fight through it because nobody really gives up. I mean, nobody goes away and says, I'm just going to give up. Most people fight, and it's such a difficult fight to try to breathe. Just try to breathe, something that we take naturally every day. I mean, I guess this is my PSA to on Dr. MEL, but I just want to say something we take so cavalierly, just to breathe, just and to watch them struggle and turn up the oxygen and have to do all the things that go into that a few years of life they may have left, or they may beat it, but just the action of watching the chemo treatments is very difficult. And
well, brother, I tell you, I know that you're into the music, and I know you're a great musician as well. And you start thinking about the way in which the Cool Jazz Festival got marketed to folk.
Yeah.
I mean, how many of I know your father, I know my pops. I mean, all a part of that. Like the jazz festivals, and so it was very natural almost that you would have a cool jazz festival. I mean, we didn't protest
Right.
the festival. We went to the festival. And so that kind of gives you a sense of how normalized these people have done. But the thing that you point out with that last comment, which I just jumped in on, was that, now that there are bans on smoking in public places, I mean, can you imagine the idea of walking into a restaurant and having it filled with smoke? I mean, like the normal thing is that you breathe clean air. It's like the normal thing. For somebody to pollute the air that you have to breathe is almost unthinkable. But the idea that someone would actually do that to themselves is even harder sometimes to get your hands around. Why would you do that?
Right.
Well,
I guess
marketing is an amazing thing. I mean, my father grew up in the Great Depression, and he came through World War II smoking. And it was normative for his entire generation. And he died of lung cancer when I was 29. And so I empathize with Wayne and all the others who have had loved ones who have passed. But these companies, they are notorious. Back in the 90s, you remember Joe Camel on every billboard? This was a cartoon character that was specifically marketed toward children. And smoking rates during the 90s for 12 to 17 was double digits, 15%, 20%. So it's conscious intent.
So we have some questions. We do have questions out there. I'm sorry to hijack excuse me, doctor, with Dr. MEL, but I just had to get that out. We have a question from Rhoda Lawrence, is one of our Los Angeles producers, West Coast producers. And she asks, are there fears that people will buy cigarettes on the street that may be rolled with drugs like fentanyl? Is that one of the fears?
Yes. I mean, people should have to be feared, regardless of this policy or not. I mean, it's irrelevant. I mean, I think you have to be concerned about anybody that's buying or procure or selling anything on the streets today. You should not be doing any drugs. You don't know what you're taking. And so, and how many more deaths do you need to have over fentanyl to learn that you don't know? So should we be fearful about that? Absolutely, we should be fearful. And that ought to make any rational person say, I'm not buying anything like that on the street. But it has nothing to do with this policy at all.
Okay. We also have Lila, who is in a blackout right now, and it's a blackout in Los Angeles, heavy winds and rain. She texts, though, the power of the phone. It says, have cigarette sales decreased at all over the last 20 years?
And before you answer that, I just hope everybody out there in LA is safe. So.
Yes.
Well, what we recognize is that the incidence of tobacco abuse in our population has waned, interestingly enough, over the past decade or so. We used to be, as African Americans, about 20% of us smoke cigarettes. Now we're hovering around 16%. As far as the profiteers, Philip Morris and these other companies are dynamic companies. They pivot. I was in Tanzania last summer. Lucy's were normal. They were selling them at every stoplight. So the impetus is to reach into other markets and use the same marketing campaigns that were used here in developing countries, with flashy billboards, great commercial advertisements, and subsidizing that by lining the pockets of the politicians.
So let's just be really clear about how pernicious, I mean, just infuriating this is. As we have done a better job of helping the Black community to do everything we can to get folk off this stuff, even as we now try to fight with this menthol to really make the next big push in the fight, they turn to our brothers and sisters on the continent, and that's where they're going to get their profits. This is about profiting over the death and disease of people of color. That's what we need to understand here. This is a deliberate, serious move. They know that these products kill you. It's the only product that you can buy that will that says on the label, this will kill you.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
It
is truly widespread and international. Not even to mention our Asian brothers and sisters too, in those countries, in terms of the pervasiveness of smoking.
I was going to speak to that, Dr. Mel. I have to shout out the people in Jakarta, because a few years ago I played at the Java Jazz Festival, Jakarta Jazz Festival, and it's truly one of the biggest festivals in the world. They ticket 150,000 people over 4 days.
Wow.
It's incredible. And the first year I attended, it was massive, and cigarette advertising was everywhere. A few years later, I attended about 7 years later, and 7 or 8 years later, and they don't allow any cigarette advertising at that festival. Now, they've lost a lot of customers there, but they did away with all the advertising for cigarettes.
Right. And there are companies, there are pharmacies in the United States where they no longer sell cigarettes, unlike the story that I told when I was 16 selling cigarettes at the People's Drugstore. So I want to get in one more question I think I see from the audience, and that's, Dr. Kingslow, how many of your patients have really tried to stop smoking but can't? And do you have any success stories?
I have numerous success stories. If there's a will, there is a way, even in the face of the most addictive product on the market. Nicotine is more addictive than crack. It's more addictive than marijuana. It's more addictive than alcohol. But the most effective way to stop smoking is, one, to make a mental, psychological commitment to quit, because that's half the battle. And then if you're unsuccessful with going cold turkey, and the majority of people are, I'd say 95% of people are, then there's products on the market that will help. Typically, the mainstay in our therapy is nicotine supplementation in the form of a nicotine patch, a nicotine lozenge or an inhaler, or a spray. And we use these products in combination where you'll wear the patch and take the inhaler simultaneously. The success rate is around 30 to 35% with those products. There doesn't sound great, but it's better than cold turkey. There was a product that was on the market that most of us are quite familiar with called Chantix. It was removed by the FDA about 3 years ago now because it had nitrosamines in the medicine. So that's a carcinogen, a potential carcinogen. So it's been since removed. But that was quite successful in about 40 to 45% of patients using that alone would be able to abstain. There is also bupropion, Wellbutrin, which is an oral agent, it's an antidepressant that's used commonly in the psychiatric population, but we use that often as monotherapy or in combination with a nicotine supplement to help allay the craving for cigarettes. And that's successful about 25 to 30% of the time. There's a product in Eastern Europe that's not been approved in the United States called cysteine. And it has a very good success rate. It's a plant-based nicotine anticholinergic agonist that helps to reduce the binding of the nicotine to the receptors, but that's unavailable.
I see we have a hand in the audience.
We have a hand in the audience. What in the heck, because I don't want to say the other word, is a plant-based anti-nicotine
anticholinergic
tribulation, whatever.
So there's
Wayne Bruce will keep us honest. He will keep us honest.
Chemicals in the brain that help to influence the desire for the nicotine, and this product reduces the attraction of those chemicals to the receptors.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you both. Thank you both for your excellent breakdown of this, very important topic. It's important for young people. It's important for the Black community. It's important for public health overall. And I think, there was been a lot of discussions and, talk about why this is harmful to the Black community if there is a menthol ban. But I think you all have clearly outlined why not only is a menthol ban important to save lives, but stopping smoking in general, period, is important to save lives. So Dr. Tuckson, Dr. Kingslow, thank you so much for being with us and enlightening us. We really, really appreciate you both.
Thank you very much for having me.
And of course, Wayne Bruce, thank you for bringing us the word from the street and keeping us honest. And I wanted to also thank Lila. Hopefully everybody out there in LA is safe. And in general, thank you to my Be Health Empowered audience for your wonderful questions. Can't wait to jump into what's going on in the chat after the show. And remember, if I don't see you during the week, remember to always be wise, be well, and be health empowered. Thanks so much for joining.
I'm on fire. This one here is vaxxed and boosted. My little brother has asthma, which means he's 6 times more likely than a healthy kid to go to the hospital.
Yeah.
Uno out.
You cheated. I'm not doing the dishes.
If I play my cards right, I am so glad they let me in.